So episode 332, Buckets with Christine Benz. Some of the things we talked about in the show is this idea of diversifying your money across different time segments. Why would you want to consider buckets? When should you consider setting them up? How much time should be associated with each bucket? How do you invest in the buckets and then replenishing them? How do you do bucket management? Like I say, I think you guys are just really going to love the show. I know I enjoyed the opportunity to speak with Christine. Without any further ado, here is episode 332. We've been doing some shows in the past talking about how to diversify your money as you're making this transition into retirement. And one concept that's both very popular and can be kind of controversial is this idea of creating buckets, of diversifying your money across different time segments as you're getting ready to head into retirement. Christine Benz has done a lot of work on this topic. Christine Benz, welcome to Sound Retirement Radio.
Jason, thank you so much for having me on.
I am so excited to be able to dig into this. I've been following your work for a long time. I've listened to a lot of podcasts that you've done. One of my favorite podcasts is the one that you're doing right now, Morningstar's The Long View. So thank you for that work.
Well, thank you. It's a fun process and fun being part of a podcast on an ongoing basis. Thanks for listening.
We're going to dig into buckets, but before we do, I'm curious to know how you got started down this path. You've been with Morningstar for 25 years. Actually, I had a friend of mine. I was asking him this morning, told him I was going to be interviewing you, and I said, "Do you have any good questions?" And the first thing he said to me, he said, "Jason, who's Morningstar?" I take for granted, I assume everybody knows who Morningstar is. So maybe you could first just tell us who Morningstar is, and then I'll ask you some more questions.
It's a good question. And I remember this is a conversation I had with my mom when I started at Morningstar in the early 1990s. She was like, veggie burgers? Because there is a firm called Morningstar that does veggie burgers and other vegetarian products. But the way I described it to her and the way I still think about the work that we do is that we aim to be kind of the Consumer Reports of investment products. So we don't have a vested interest in whether someone does business with T. Rowe Price or Vanguard or Schwab. Our idea is to help provide some clarity around what are good quality investment products, what are poor quality investment products, and help consumers make smart decisions. And of course, Morningstar has a lot of different areas, some of which focus on providing products to advisors as well as to institutional investors. But the work that I do and the work that we have on Morningstar.com is mainly geared toward individual investors and helping them make smart choices.
Awesome. And what tool, if people are listening, they've never explored Morningstar, what is the tool that you think they would get the most value out of, or how would they get the most value by using Morningstar?
I think a great tool, a great starter tool is a tool called XRay or Instant XRay on our website. And the neat thing about XRay is you plug in your portfolio holdings and it'll show you an X-ray view of your portfolio's asset allocation, its sector weightings relative to the S&P 500, how much you have in certain types of companies. So how much you have in small companies, how much you have in large size growth oriented companies. And the reason we call it X-ray is that it doesn't just take a large growth mutual fund and put it all in the large growth square of the style box. It actually looks into the portfolio and says, well, it's a large growth fund, but it has 10% international stocks. It has maybe 15% in mid-size companies. So it actually drills into the whole holdings. And I think it's really powerful functionality. It's a good way to get your arms around what's in your portfolio.
Yeah, that is a great tool. That is a great tool. Thank you guys for developing it. So getting back to the beginning, you've been with Morningstar now for over 25 years. How did you get started? What has your career path looked like?
Yeah, it hasn't been a straight trajectory by any stretch. I started actually as part of Morningstar's copy editing team. So I was editing the analyst reports, and I had a little bit of an investing background through my dad, who had always been an avid investor himself and kind of shared some of his thinking with me. But I didn't know a lot about investing, but along the way became more engaged and more interested in investing, and trained as an analyst after starting as a copy editor, and became an analyst and eventually headed up our mutual fund analyst team in the US, and sort of along the way became more interested in broader issues of financial planning as opposed to just investment selection. So I went through the CFP, Certified Financial Planner program, and really began to think that I wanted to take my career more in that direction while remaining with Morningstar. And Morningstar was nice enough to just kind of create a role for me where I was able to do that and be able to talk more about financial planning considerations as well as investment planning considerations.
Awesome. As you talk about your dad and that relationship, his introduction to you with investing, and you go as far back as you can in your memory to think about your dad and that relationship, what are maybe one or two things that your dad taught you about investing that have kind of stuck with you?
Well, my dad was a researcher in terms of his investments, and he was an early adopter of Morningstar. In fact, he was the one who introduced me to Morningstar, and he was a consumer of its research. So I think that research intensive approach really rubbed off on me. And I guess more broadly, when I think about my upbringing, I am from a large family, but I have to say from a financial standpoint, it was an incredibly tranquil sort of environment. There was just little discussion of money, not in an unhealthy way, but just sort of like my parents paid their bills. They weren't overspenders, and there was money, to send us to college. And it was just a very tranquil environment with respect to money. And I guess that's something that I try to infuse my work with, this idea of getting your financial life in order to get yourself peace of mind and to help you focus on other parts of your life. So I guess that was something I learned from both my parents, that sense of really wanting to have a tranquil financial life and trying to educate other people about doing that too.
I love that. I have kids, 12 and 15, and trying to teach them about investing and personal finance and money, and recently helped open up some investment accounts for them. And so it's fun at the dinner table at night to hear my son talk about some of these different investments that he's choosing and why he's choosing them. And then to look at what my daughter's buying. I mean, she's buying all of the stuff that she loves. She's, Apple and Hawaiian Airlines and just some of the companies that she enjoys so much. But
the Peter Lynch approach.
Yeah. COVID, we're in this really wild time, hopefully coming to the end of COVID. But as you think about it, what have you learned personally and professionally that you think will probably stick with you for the rest of your life as a result of having to live through a global pandemic?
Yeah, it's a good question. Personally, I guess, like a lot of people, I've found myself with more time to think big picture thoughts about, what am I doing? What purpose are various activities serving? And so I guess I think that for many of us has been kind of a silver lining, this ability to be more purposeful, and to have time to think some of those bigger picture thoughts that sometimes we don't have time to do when we're, scurrying hither and thither. So I would say that has been something that I have appreciated through this really difficult period. Professionally, one thing I've been keeping an eye on is just what a bifurcated world we live in with respect to money matters, that I think the pandemic has really exacerbated income inequality in this country. You see it in the unemployment data. And, I've been a believer that we'll probably have this sort of K-shaped recovery where we have people who have been able to remain employed, that they've actually improved their savings through this period, whereas other people have been on a downward trajectory. So that's something that I've been staying attuned to. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is just this issue of, it seems small and mundane, but this issue of people building emergency reserves and how difficult it seems to be for people. So I love the idea of if we could formalize that strategy for emergency funding to actually give people maybe a savings mechanism within their workplace to enable them to set aside liquid reserves. And there have been a few proposals that have been floated through Congress, but I would love the idea of us as a country thinking seriously about how do we incentivize short-term savings just as we incentivize long-term savings for retirement and for